So now we'll begin with the substantive part of the conference, ladies and gentlemen. There are going to be 3 panels, and as Dr. Myra Hayat explained at the beginning, that these 3 panels follow a very clear roadmap. And that roadmap is this, that panel 1 will talk about the scale of the problem, masla hai kya, hum us masle ko kitna samajhte hain. Panel 2 will talk about climate governance, کہ ہماری الیکٹڈ برانچز حکومت اس کے بارے میں کیا سوچ رہی ہے اور پرائیویٹ سیکٹر سے لوگ اس کے بارے میں کیا سوچ رہے ہیں, ہم کیا کر سکتے ہیں اور کیا کر رہے ہیں. اینڈ پینل 3 will talk about the response of the courts, how they see it, what they've done till now and what they think they can do in the future. You can have a different view on these conversations and you can disagree with parts of what is going to be said, but you cannot remain out of this conversation. آپ مختلف نظریہ رکھ سکتے ہیں, بٹ آج جو گفتگو ہو رہی ہے اس میں شامل ضرور ہوئیے, یہ ہماری آپ سے گزارش ہے. Now talking about panel 1, which is titled Climate Change Challenges for Pakistan. The background is that Pakistan is a country diverse in terms of geography as well as weather patterns. No matter where you live in Pakistan, you're affected either by heat wave, floods, smog, or agricultural food supply. Are our cities equipped to deal with the challenges that we face? What are some of the most urgent ones? How are they connected? And what adaptation measures are underway today? We're delighted to have a panel of experts who will be talking about this. I'd first like to invite on stage and introduce Mr. Ali Taqi Sheikh, who's chairing this panel. Mr. Sheikh is a member of the newly created Loss and Damage Fund, where he chairs the Asia Pacific Group. He also serves on this board's Rules and Procedures Committee to support the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund. And he writes a bi-weekly column on the climate change for Daily Dawn. He's also an advisor to Climate Change Planning Commission of Pakistan. We're delighted to have you, sir. Thank you. The first speaker on the panel that I'd like to invite on stage is Professor Dr. Sajid Rashid Ahmed. He's Principal Dean, Geosciences, University of the Punjab. Dr. Rashid Ahmed is presently working as Dean Faculty of Geosciences and Principal College of Earth and Environmental Sciences, University of Punjab, Lahore. He has a PhD in Earth and Environmental Sciences from the University of Windsor, Ontario, Canada. He has almost 3 years of academic and administrative experience as well as research experience, and he has written nearly 300 articles in national and international journals. His research covers earth and environmental sciences as well as climate change. So we're delighted to have you here. Anyone who's not here today? Dr. Fahad Saeed, he's sent us an address online because he had to be in Bonn to talk about climate change. Is part of the climate science and impacts team at Climate Analytics. He has been working on climate modeling and data. He is a recognized and globally respected climate scientist. He has a PhD in Earth Sciences from MPIM at Hamburg, Germany, with a focus on regional climate modeling and mainly works on the South Asian region. We're very delighted to have his contribution with us here today. Next up is Ms. Simi Kamal. She'll be joining us on Zoom. She's the chairperson of the Hisar Foundation. She's a geographer, water expert, climate change and environmental professional, women's rights campaigner, and poverty alleviation specialist. Currently, she's the chair of the International Water Management Institute, Sri Lanka, board director, Khushali Microfinance Bank, a trustee of WaterAid UK, and a board member of CABI UK. She has led over 200 research studies, and we're truly privileged that she will be talking to us today. Next, I'd like to welcome and invite Professor Dr. Iqrar Ahmed Khan. Professor Saab is a graduate of the University of Agriculture, Faisalabad, and University of California. He has been serving as VC of the University of Agriculture, Faisalabad since 2008. He has served as Director General, Nuclear Institute for Agriculture and Biology, and Chief of Party, US-Pakistan Center for Advanced Studies in Agriculture and Food Security. He has secured 40 funded research projects, published 150 refereed publications, edited 50 books, and he's a fellow of the Pakistan Academy of Sciences. Government of Pakistan has awarded him Hilal-e-Imtiaz. We're so privileged to have you with us, sir. Thank you. Dr. Nausheen Hafiza Anwar will be joining us on Zoom. She was very kind to send her contribution through an online connection. Dr. Nausheen Anwar is Director, Karachi Urban Lab and Professor City and Regional Planning, Institute of Business Administration, Karachi. She is also a fellow in the city's Cluster Institute of Development Studies, University of Sussex, which is a globally acknowledged and respected institute. Her research work has been published in journals such as Antipode, Urban Studies, South Asian History and Culture, and Political Geography. She is the recipient of grants from IDRC, DFID, National University Singapore, and Harvard University, and is also the recipient of Teaching and Research Excellence Awards from the very well-respected Institute of Business Administration, Karachi. We're delighted for her presence. Thank you. And Dr. Ghulam Rasool, who's a climate change expert and one of our esteemed speakers. We're very grateful that you could be here with us, sir, today. He served as the Vice President of WMO for Asia Pacific Region, Regional Program Manager of ICI MOD, and Head of Climate Change Program of IUCN Pakistan. He's a member of various international scientific associations, and presently he's advisor to the China-Pakistan Joint Research Center for Earth Sciences. So we're deeply grateful for your presence. Thank you. I let the learned chair take it from here. Thank you.
Honorable Chief Justice, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ali Tawqir Sheikh and I'll be your host for next hour or so. In this 1 hour, I have 5 very distinguished panelists. We'll go on a quick journey of the country. We'll begin from our glaciers and splendid mountain ecosystems. That's where our water is, that's where our ecology is, and then we'll come to where the Indus finishes, at mangroves in the coastal areas, in big cities, where we have heat waves, urban flooding. Oh, my apologies. Sorry, I didn't realize that. From mountain areas, we'll come to the coastal areas. That's where 1/5 of Pakistan's population lives. That's where our ecosystem ends, Arabian Sea. And then we will talk about the plains of Punjab in terms of food security and its nexus with water. And then finally we'll talk about the air quality that we breathe in different parts of the country. We will see in this very quick journey how we are challenged by climate change. Let me share with you the choreography. I have 5 panelists and 5 questions. And I'll be asking the same question to 5 different people to respond and react to the challenge that they face in their own domain. As I learned recently in my life, through the live streaming of Supreme Court hearings, the hardest questions are the simplest ones. And I have tried to put very simple questions, and before I proceed, let me share those questions with you as audience. Sorry. Apologies, my pages are a little bit out of order, I think. Sorry. first question is very simple at the face of it. How your area, such as mountain system, is affecting people, their livelihoods, their health, or their ecology, or even their legal rights. And we'll take the same question to the urban areas, and then we'll take the same question to agriculture and then water. And we'll see how these different experts react to those questions. And second question to my panelists will be what policies, laws, or procedures govern them, how effective they are. And since we want to generate some optimism that a lot is being done, can be done, and then if they can share some case studies or best practices that are happening. We'll go into future as well, that how the temperature increased to 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees or beyond as the heat and precipitation or the rain changes, how it will affect our lives and livelihoods. What's the projection for 2030, 2050 for Pakistan? And finally, what are some of the takeaways, what are the immediate gaps that we can try to fill? Now, before I invite my first panelist, I just wanted to highlight once again, I think we have heard excellent keynote addresses, that most fundamentally, climate change is a development issue. And that means it's about the quality of our life and lifestyles. In other words, it's about our relationship with society and with each other. That is another way of saying that as a development issue, as a societal issue, this is an issue about our roles and responsibilities, obligations, justice, fair play, and equity. I think just as Mansoor used the word of dignity, equity, and justice. These are the key themes. And we'll try to see, as we go through different areas of the country, how far they're connected with each other, how far the ecosystems rely on each other for their health. So I have a very impressive lineup. Let me begin with Dr. Ikrar, with the very first question. Maafi chahta hu, Dr. Ikrar. Dr. Ghulam Rasool talks about ecosystems in mountainous areas. What are the biggest challenges that you see exist there, affecting lives and livelihoods?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mountain ecosystems of Pakistan are very fragile. When we talk about the cryosphere area, especially Himalaya, Hindu Kush, and Karakoram ranges, they are hosting more than 7,000 glaciers in the political jurisdiction of Pakistan. So these glaciers are receding at a faster rate due to global warming. Along with that recession, there is thinning also taking place. That thinning is causing water supply problems in mountainous communities. Those channels which were traditionally drawn from the accumulation zones of the glaciers, those are drying up because of thinning of the glaciers. And recession of the glaciers is resulting into formation of lakes. And those lakes are suffering outbursts when they are filled beyond their capacity.
Thank you. This formation of lakes, we just saw a picture of a disaster, Attahabad Lake. Is it resulting in internal displacement and people moving to other regions in order to protect themselves?
Yes, outburst of these lakes, this is number one disaster of Gilgit-Baltistan and Chitral area. And these lakes, when they are suffering outburst, they carry a lot of mud, big boulders, And over the steep slopes, the landscapes are just erased from those locations. And they are causing stream damming also. They bring a lot of debris, and then they enter in the river, they recurve, and at the recurvature, they leave a lot of mud, a lot of debris.
Causing downstream flooding and disasters.
Yeah.
Let me go downstream further to the coastal area. Dr. Nashin, thank you for joining us. We know it's very, very early for you. Karachi is a big city, by way of example, 1/5 of Pakistan's population. That's in the neighborhood of our mangroves, and it has emerged as a heat wave capital of Pakistan. It has also emerged as an urban flooding capital for us. What is your reflection? How the issue of climate change is affecting the lives and livelihoods of the rural people there who are gravitated towards that city?
Thank you very much, Ali, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to be a part of this forum today and this conversation. So if we take Karachi as a proxy really to think about cities all over Pakistan, even though the microclimatic contexts do vary, and Karachi is not necessarily the hottest city in Pakistan. Jacobabad has now become the poster child actually for South Asia, where we've seen thresholds exceed of ambient temperature of 50, 51, 52 Celsius. That's just ambient, it's not WBGT. So the impacts are not just about what happens to poor people's lives, but it's also about vulnerable populations in general. And so the elderly, looking at pregnant women, children, and so vulnerability can also be present in households that are middle class. And this is also contingent on factors such as availability of energy, of 24 hours of electricity, access to ventilation. And then in Pakistan cities and large urban centers and even smaller urban centers, you have the challenge of low-income and informal settlements that are usually the most underserviced when it comes to access to crucial infrastructures that actually can disable people's coping strategies and adaptation responses to overheating. And cities present a particular kind of conundrum, which is very, very different from the rural context. Global warming is also interacting with urban heat islands. So the way that we have built our cities, and this is not just a Pakistan problem, this is a global urban problem, both in the north and the south. But in Pakistan in particular, the way that we have built our cities and are continuing to build our cities, this is actually adding to and exacerbating the problem of overheating, which is also not just about the outside inside. In the interior of homes, it's the bricks, the mortar, the asphalt. So the whole aspect of design and architecture and engineering has become a very, very, very crucial component of how we need to think about climate change and overheating effects, especially in relation to the involvement of urban planning and municipal governance.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to ask you one question. We see that the periodicity or the frequency of tropical storms is increasing, and evacuating such a large number is a very, very big challenge. In one or two sentences, can you tell us what's the biggest governance crisis or governance challenge that we have in terms of managing tropical storms?
Well, I think, again, at the municipal level, if we're talking about urban contexts specifically or even rural contexts, the municipal aspect is the most disconnected aspect in the overall governance matrix in Pakistan. So we can have response systems that are channeled through national adaptation plans or even at the provincial level, but at the local level, the engagement is exceedingly poor, it's very disconnected, and the understanding of what disaster management and response systems also should look like and how they should actually pan out on the local level is very, very poor. So whether it comes to evacuating people or dealing with heat adaptation and so forth, it's generally across the board.
Thank you. Dr. Iqrar, you have spent a lifetime on food and agricultural security related issues. Growing population, growing urbanization, less and less rate of return on our investments in agriculture with increasing population. How the equation is becoming more complex because of climate change.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to Supreme Court for allowing us this opportunity. I have never been to this place, even though I was appointed by Supreme Court. The land and water equation is what is basically precipitating into food security. We have about 54 million acres of cropped land and about 140 million acre foot of water. About 54 or 55 million acre foot of that water is underground water, and the rest of the water is coming from 5 rivers. The water use efficiency can be gauged in many ways, but one of the ways to look at it is that there is a global standard that each million acre foot of water can translate into a GDP of $1 billion, whereas our agricultural GDP hovers between 50 to 60. That means it's less than 50% of the water use efficiency that we are currently working with. There are many reasons to that, which is Varabandi, the flood irrigation, the design which was constructed back in 1870s, and we are still hooked to that because of small land holding, because of lack of land reforms, because of uneven distribution of water. If you look at water allocations in Upper Punjab and Central Punjab, it's 3 cubic for 1,000 acre. As you go down to South Muzaffargarh, it's 5, down to Panjanath, it starts going up, and in Sakhar Barrage, most of it is 20 to 22 cubic per 1,000 acre. So there's uneven distribution and wastage of water. Also, the water equation is linked with 2 crops, even though we grow more than 100 crops, but 2 crops which are taking away 75% of the water and which are also the major equation of our food security. They are wheat and rice. And wheat and rice are the most inefficient water using crops. So climate change has actually created more uncertainty. There is an issue with the rising temperature, but there is science which is silver lining, and I assure you that we have solutions which are available, but there is political will required.
In finding the solutions, I'm sorry, I want to ask you something before going to my next panelist. Is it possible for you to tell us whether or not the cropping pattern has decisively moved and moving away from wheat towards sugarcane or some other water-intensive crops? Just in 1 or 2 sentences, kindly.
Wheat has a political economy. The government's procurement systems have basically hooked the farmer to wheat. And this year is the first time a right decision at the wrong time. This decision should have been taken earlier, but this year there's plenty of wheat and government is not procuring. I think this will take some time to stabilize, but in the long run, we must move out of this political economy so that the farmer thinks in terms of diversification. There's a $10 billion food import, and part of that is because of our political economy of 5 crops, which are wheat, rice, sugarcane, in some part maize and cotton.
Got that. Yeah. Let me reach out to Simi Kamal. This is the right time. The water agriculture nexus is nowhere stronger than in Pakistan. And I'm told that the challenge is that by 2047, we'll be almost 350 million people with half the water. So we'll have to bring a 4 times efficiency to survive with viable energy, viable water. So the question to you in this sense, is it one of the most important conflict sources requiring attention of justice, or is it a pricing issue that can be fixed with market mechanisms?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be back in a Supreme Court session. And if you recall, in 2018, we had a very, very big session there on water. So I'm very happy to be here again. I want to answer that question by going back a little to say that I completely agree with what Dr. Adil Najam, a good friend, was saying. He and I think very similarly on these aspects. And I just want to reinforce what I'm going to say by pointing out to something he said, that water is the point why climate and law meet. And I think this message has to be clearly understood by our justice infrastructure. So the impacts of climate change are so great on water as we saw what happened in the flooding, for example, that we must understand the interconnection with some historical injustices. And I would like to refer to that because I can't answer your question without that. So Pakistan's irrigation system was originally developed by the British colonizers to grow crops in plantation mode to meet the requirements of the British Empire. And they eliminated the traditional common lands and local systems and put into motion a land holding pattern that has created a class of big landowners in large parts of what is now Pakistan. So land ownership continues to be the condition for claiming water rights, whether in rural and urban areas. And this has led to the biggest injustice in the water sector, now so heavily affected by climate change, that landless people and sharecroppers in rural areas and people living in unplanned water settlements, they have no direct right to water. So the need for having comprehensive water law in Pakistan was never greater. And unless we have this comprehensive water law, we are not going to be able to either control the markets in terms of the food crops that you just talked about and the whole political economy that has just been mentioned by Dr. Ikrar. So that is something we have to look at. So climate change affecting Pakistan's water has to be seen in the context of whether we as a nation look at water as a source of development, dignity and prosperity for all citizens, so that it is not a source for inequality and injustice anymore, which it is at the moment. And so the toxic power structure which has been developed by the landholding patterns means that where the right decision should be taken, Parliament and elsewhere, the people that hold the voices over there are not going to take decisions that are going to be against the economic interests. So as long as we have this unequal pattern, and women, young people, landless farmers, city dwellers, people who live in marginal areas and downstream communities of our irrigation system, they will have little voice. They don't have forums to share their concerns, and they are largely absent from the climate debates. And these debates are just, as we say, the way they are being waged on TV and on social media right now is more disinformation than information. And lastly, I'd just like to say that the new challenge for Pakistan is the direct impact of climate change in terms of tropicalizing Pakistan. So this is the reality we have to accept. With the shifting of seasons, the natural regions, ecosystems and agro-agricultural zones are all changing. And this is the debate we need, not our national obsession with more and more irrigation infrastructure.
Thank you.
That shift has to happen if we could even look at the real challenges that we have to tackle. Thank you.
Thank you. Your point is very well taken. I want to go across to the air pollution issues. Pakistani cities are now ranked one of the worst ones in terms of air quality. And it's a complex issue dealing with agriculture, lifestyles, transportation. Can you tell us what kind of health challenges it poses to us as citizens?
Thank you very much for this question, and I'm really glad that today this is the first time I'm saying that academia, judiciary, civil society and government are sitting in a one room and they are finding the answer of these big issues. As you mentioned about the air quality, let me clear first thing that before 2015, nobody is talking about the air pollution in Pakistan. Nobody is worried about the smoke, because when this problem came and there was a thick smokes and people are suffering from this disease, lungs, coughing and others, then everybody is talking about, oh, what is this? But if you will see in China, 18th centuries, in US, 19th centuries, they all were facing this air pollution problem and they got the solutions. But unfortunately, from 2015 up to now, we are just talking about the air quality. Basic thing is air, water, soil, noise, these are the major climate change problems, and they are interlinked, sir. And in Pakistan and all over the world, the report published in 2023 from the US that 7 million people are dying due to air pollution, premature death in the world. And the life expectancy is decreasing in Pakistan. 5 साल हमारे कम हो गए हैं. Everybody is thinking कि अगर मेरी उम्र 70 साल होनी थी, वैसे तो अल्लाह जानता है, but due to this air pollution, 5 years are gone.
Air pollution you attribute mostly to transportation sector or what?
Sir, this is the problem that we are just talking about only the transportation. Transportation is one of the key
1%
player. That is around about 45%.
45%.
Agriculture, transportation, industries, and our communities' behavior. These are the multiple factors which affect the air pollution.
So the
because
transportation.
I don't care about if I will burn the things in my home.
जी, ये जो मैं पूछना चाह रहा हूँ वो ये है कि so the transportation
Yes.
is the single largest issue.
Yeah, this is the
And
largest.
is it after the 18th Amendment is a national level issue or a provincial issue?
Actually, it's in my
Just in
opinion,
one sentence, sir.
Yeah, in my opinion, it's an individual issue because nobody is bothering to test his own vehicle, either it is giving the smoke or not. आप बाहर कहीं चले जाएं, मेरी अपनी गाड़ी मोटरसाइकिल है, चिंची रक्षा है, कोई भी चीज़ है, I am responsible and everybody is responsible. You cannot say it's a federal issue or a provincial issue.
Excellent. So it's an individual responsibility. We respected it. A purpose of raising this issue is about the fitness of vehicles, the quality of fuel that is imported and marketed, and then, of course, public transportation. So I'll come back to you on these issues. I want to come to some aspects that we may not have covered because of paucity of time. And I just want to go that very quickly with Dr. Ghulam Rasool and to the others. Dr. Saab, there are a lot of innovation and initiatives undertaken by Pakistan, citizens, communities, to protect our ecosystems in mountainous areas. Any best practice, something that can give us optimism that the citizen can take charge, innovative initiatives that may have been successful, or even if not successful, but a source of learning for us. Just a minute or two.
Yeah, I can put an example of Bhutan from the region while I was working at EC Board Nepal. So we were working in Bhutan also. Bhutan is a glaring example of success in tackling climate. Now they are carbon neutral and they are known as organic country. Organic agriculture has been promoted to that extent that people are prosperous, communities are enjoying benefits, and environment is quite clean. So this is a success story. But in Pakistan, there are some efforts going on at pilot stage. At present, they are not reaching to the conclusion. But I hope, like Bhutan, we can also move forward and we can achieve that stage.
Dr. Simi, if I can come to you. You work quite closely with many diverse groups. Any examples from water sector whereby you could say that citizens' rights are better protected when they take charge of their lives?
Firstly, I'm not a doctor, so just that correction. Let me say that when we talk about how citizens have reacted to the issues of climate change, impact on water, so local groups, NGOs have done massively things that have to be now put together and taken up on a whole national scale. For example, people have thought, plant glaciers to help new ones grow. This has been known for centuries. In the same way, there are ways and ways of harvesting moisture and rainfall. Harvesting systems have existed all over Pakistan. They are still there. If you look at Thar, you will see how skimming wells are available, where the differences in temperature between night and day causes dew to form, and even that water is harvested. So these skimming wells have been known for a long time. They're just a few inches deep, but they can bring sufficient water in the right geography and topography. So all of these have to be taken to scale. That is the issue. So if we look at shifting people to more people-friendly interventions, the Living Indus that Dr. Najib spoke about have a lot of interventions that could be happily used. And many of these systems have many names in parts of our culture, and these are seen as common resources which all parts of community can access. So these are not owned by individuals or families. So that is one change and one good practice that we need to take to scale. And these would be fair interventions open to all. And so to counter inequalities, to be a focus on ecosystems that embody a functioning relationship between climate, land, water, biodiversity, and occupations, livelihoods of people. We have seen a lot of these examples of what Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund has done on a larger scale, what the Rural Development Program, the RSPs have done, and what a whole range of NGOs have been doing right across Pakistan. These can be taken up, but if they have to go to scale, then the government has to show leadership. That is where the big problem exists. There are some difficult decisions that have to be taken, so they have to be taken. We just can't keep pandering to interests of particular particular interest groups. And we have to diversify our agriculture. Globally now, only 60 food crops are left. And just a little while ago, we were talking and we heard about those 5 important crops. So in order to make that move, we have to understand that a shift has to occur in the way we work with communities. And that means functioning local government system. That's the only way we can take things down.
Brilliant, brilliant, actually. I think it's the right time for me to go to Dr. Nosheen. You have worked quite recently on heat wave related issues and several other aspects that deal with how to sum up some of the success stories from the part of the world that you are working with.
Ali, the success story part on heat is a tall order. Let me begin by saying that if I refer to the Pakistan urban context, there are really no success stories as such, because we're not engaging on the heat factor in quite as substantive a fashion as we should. And heat is a stealth killer, and it actually, there is a whole medical aspect involved over here on how heat kills people. You don't have to necessarily see dead bodies lying on the street to be able to say, okay, well, this year the heat waves didn't result or trigger as many deaths as they did in 2015. Heat kills quietly, and when people's bodies are exposed to chronic and acute temperatures, so we're only talking about heat waves here, we haven't even touched upon chronic heat, which is seasonal. So when people's bodies are exposed to both acute and chronic heat over seasons and over the years, then their adaptation and coping strategies are made vulnerable and are weakened in different ways. So our response systems at the community level and the municipal level on heat adaptation, on heat risk mitigation strategies are very, very poor in Pakistan. We have the heat management plan. Karachi is an example, which is really a carbon copy of the Ahmedabad, India's heat management plan, to Ahmedabad mein unveil hua tha. And so the Pakistan Meteorological Department has made certain inroads in launching warnings, etc., just before a heat wave happens. But here's the conundrum. The WHO and WMO, World Health Organization and World Meteorological Organization, have recently taken up this whole issue of the risk associated with indoor heating. So when we're looking at informal settlements, certain kinds of homes, schools, prison systems, etc., that people's vulnerability to heat, whether it's chronic or acute, is not just in relation to heat waves and outdoor temperatures, but it's also about what happens to indoor temperatures in certain kinds of facilities, in certain kinds of indoor settings. So how are people's response systems in terms of their health and their coping strategies in relation to certain kinds of infrastructures. How is this entire matrix then unfolding? This is not a very pleasant situation in Pakistan right now when it comes to cities. There are frankly, no happy stories to tell, other than people are coping on ground in the best way that they can. There are certain stories to think about and talk about in other parts of the global south. For instance, in Bangladesh, in urban centers, the government has appointed heat officers. This has happened in Dhaka. This has also happened in certain other parts of Africa, in certain urban centers. But in Pakistan, these kinds of conversations we have not even touched upon these conversations. What should be the role of heat officers? How should they be embedded at the local level, at the community level? How do you take up and understand both passive forms of cooling and active forms of cooling and take these up and put them and embed them in planning systems and municipal governance systems so that our response mechanisms, our response strategies, our planning strategies, our legal system, all of these then appeal to and respond to the needs and wants and health risks of a spectrum of different populations in urban centers throughout Pakistan. We haven't even really touched upon these issues yet.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a complex issue. One is tempted to ask more questions on this, but let me go to Dr. Akrar. You have worked on climate smart agriculture. I'm certain that unlike in urban areas, as Nosheen was saying, there are success stories that you can share with us, at least 1 or 2 benchmarks to give us optimism.
Okay, in agriculture sector, actually, the technology that is sitting on the shelf has sufficient space to become climate resilient. And there is also a proper legal framework which is in place. What happens is that the implementation process, the governance weaknesses, and also the lack of trust of the investor, which is slowing down the adaptation process. There is data science, there are GM crops, there are image processing technologies, there are biofertilizers, there are biopesticides, there are issues which actually fail everything in the market. So if this legal framework is put together to become functional as the spirit of legal frame should be, then you can see the transformation. In climate smart agriculture, the most important feature lies in genetic manipulation. You know, there are crops there are plants which live happily in the desert until the weather becomes normal. There's a huge flora in the ocean which is larger than terrestrial flora, which can live saline water. So genetically, there are only 4 bases, AT and GC, and the science is robust enough to make use of those genes which are available to tolerate drought, which are available to tolerate heat, particularly the 2 Celsius, which we are talking right now, and also to adapt to salinity. Our lands are degrading because of aridity and because of use of saline water. So technology package which is sitting in the shelf, it awaits proper investment environment and capacity of the adapter to adopt. When you're talking about 90% of the farmer below 5-acre ownership, and you tell them these technology is Greek for them. So you have to enable them. The enablement requirement basically is actually economically viable. We have given business models to the government. We have written policy strategy documents, and when we present those to the governments, they seem to be convinced, but end of the day, when it becomes a challenge of implementation, nobody listens to that. We have to invest in mechanization. There is a national biosafety law in environment ministry, which is not working properly. In my opinion, there should be a debate on why we are against GM crops. The only GM crop which we brought in was cotton. That brought down the use of pesticide by 70%. The world is eating GM corn, world is eating GM soybean, world is eating GM canola. China is the biggest importer of GM crops, and the Chinese health standards are getting better and better. And we are 40% malnourished because we're talking against technology. So this climate smart agriculture is right on the corner. We need to let it happen.
There are many opportunities. Point well taken. Dr. Saab, you said it depends on the citizen. I am reminded from a group from New Delhi. dealing with air pollution issues. فارن آفس کے افسروں کی بیگمات اور وہاں کے جو گورنمنٹ دہلی کی گورنمنٹ کی جو بیگمات تھیں انہوں نے اپنا گروپ بنایا بیکاز اٹ واز elite, nobody could contest them that easily. And they became very effective. Media started covering, their interviews started appearing, and the live coverage of data being released at the PMD in New Delhi. They have signboards all over the city on the emissions level. And this. I want to ask you, from Lahore, you are based in Punjab, anything in terms of managing our air pollution that gives you optimism that we are moving towards some action, serious action?
Definitely. Actually, before that, I will just give you one success story in Punjab regarding the control of the air pollution, that is the brick kilns. The technology, the conventional brick kilns, they were converted into the zigzag technology, and for that, there will be 20 to 30% reduction in the emission, and that will be a big success story in Punjab. And if it will be happen all over the Pakistan, that will be. Other thing is the hookah style. Hookah style is the other technology. If we will adopt that, and some of the brick kilns, they adopted this, and they reduce the thing. And third thing is with our college, University of the Punjab here, we did the coal plus 20% of agriculture waste, जिसे हम आग लगा देते थे, हमने इसको मिलाकर briquettes तैयार की हैं. That briquettes will burn in the brick kilns कोयले की जगह पे, और उससे भी 30 to 50% reduction emission के अंदर आई है. Your question regarding the social media, the awareness, because there are a lot of success stories, but these are the individual. For example, in Sialkot, our sports industries, they are exporting the things, but there is no publicized. That is the private sector.
Thank you.
They are not publicized the things. So we have to publicize these things.
I apologize. I had to push a little bit. I do wish to open the floor for 5 minutes to get some questions, sharp questions. We will not be able to give answers, but at least we'll all know what is on our minds. Are there any mics on the floor? माइक्स हैं फ्लोर पे इस वक्त, क्वेश्चन पूछे जा सकते हैं. दिस द लेडी एट द एंड. बेटे जल्दी जाइए, पीछे पीछे मैडम, मैम, वो दैट यंग लेडी. I'll come to the front a little later, sir. Let me get a few younger people first. No? Chale, I think that.
Thank you, sir.
Right away.
Please
keep it short.
Yes, sir, it's quick, sir. My name is Ali Jabir, and I'm an environmental journalist from APP. My question to the panelists is that I'm seeing a lot of optimism from them. As Sir Ikrar said, that the technology on the shelf is available that can be replicated very easily. Sir Ghulam Rasool said there are best practices and models globally. And Sir Sajid also said that there are certain startups going on. But sir, why there is no cohesion, or the outcome is not that interesting? They are relying on conventional media to communicate to the people. But today's opinion curator is the social media. Why they are not approaching that medium to promote their knowledge for better best practices for climate resilience?
We got it. The next person is sitting here. Idhar laiye, ma'am. Kiska haath hai yahan pe? Yahan pe kisi saab ne question raise kiya. چلیے آگے آ جائیے اگر نہیں آ رہی تو. یہاں پہ کسی کا ہاتھ تھا؟ نو.
تمام حاضرین کا شکریہ, بہت اچھا لگا. میرا ایک سوال انوائرمنٹ کے حوالے سے ہے. میں ایک انوائرمنٹ پروٹیکشن آرگنائزیشن کا حصہ ہوں. बूरे वाला के मैं जिक्र करूँगा कि वहाँ पर एक प्रोग्राम शुरू हुआ है उसको सिटी को बेहतर करने के लिए, उसमें वर्ल्ड बैंक भी इन्वॉल्व है और बेतहाशा वहाँ से दरख्त काटे गए हैं और बड़े पैमाने पे वो दरख्त काटे गए हैं, जिसके लिए हमने अपनी आवाज़ भी बुलंद की, लेकिन वहाँ कुछ सुनने वाले नहीं और अभी भी उन्होंने बिडिंग की हुई है। तो इसके लिए है कि हम अगर इन्वायरमेंट पे हम काम कर रहे हैं, हम दरख्त लगा रहे हैं, उन दरख्त जो मैं दरख्त लगा रहा हूँ उसको तो 10 साल लगेंगे बढ़ने में, और जो 20 साल पुराने दरख्त हैं वो काटे जा रहे हैं। तो इसके लिए मेरी तमाम जो यहाँ हाजिर मौजूद हैं उनसे मेरी रिक्वेस्ट है कि इस पर भी कुछ किया जाए। थैंक यू।
शुक्रिया। औरतें यहाँ पे साहब थे, सॉरी, ये मैम, ये इनके पास आइए। कौर साहब हैं तो भी हाथ खड़ा कर ले, हमारा टाइम खत्म होने लगा। None of the ladies, actually there was one hand at the beginning.
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। मेरा नाम सैयद गुलाम है, फॉरेस्ट डिपार्टमेंट बलूचिस्तान से मेरा ताल्लुक है। आप लोगों ने माउंटेन इकोसिस्टम की बात की, लेकिन हमारे बलूचिस्तान में सबसे जो बड़े मसाइल है वो हमारा रेंज लैंड है, और वहाँ ग्रेजिंग इस वक्त मैं तो ये कह रहा हूँ कि इंतहाई ज़्यादा ओवर स्टॉकिंग से भी ज़्यादा, जो हम बात कर रहे हैं ओवर स्टॉकिंग, उससे भी ज़्यादा ग्रेजिंग हो रही है। 45% ऑफ द लाइफ स्टॉक ऑफ द कंट्री जो है इस वक्त ग्रेज कर रहे बलूचिस्तान में, लेकिन उसके मुकाबले में जो हमारी इनिशिएटिव्स है वो बिल्कुल पीनट हैं। तो इस इकोसिस्टम को, इसके साथ साथ जो हमारा डेजर्ट इकोसिस्टम है, आपको मैं बता दूं कि इस वक्त डेजर्टिफिकेशन जो है बलूचिस्तान का बहुत बड़ा मसला है। अभी मई जून में जो आप हमारे स्टॉर्म्स आ रहे हैं, जिसकी वजह से हमारी फ्लाइट्स भी कई दफ़ा जो है वो कैंसिल हो जाती है, ये उन्हीं जो डेजर्ट है उसकी वजह से, उसको भी कोई तवज्जो नहीं दे रहा है। हम अगर सिर्फ लिविंग इंडस पे ही तवज्जो देंगे ना, तो अब 45% ऑफ द कंट्री जो है उसका जो है उसको आप भूल रहे हैं।
वी गॉट इट। डिजर्टिफिकेशन एंड ग्रेजिंग राइट्स। So, answers ka time.
Anjum Rashid from Institute of Regional Studies.
Okay, right. Yes, ma'am.
Actually, I would like to bring your notice towards the illegal import of lead-based fuel in Pakistan from Iran. So sometimes it's burnt openly, occasionally, but mostly it's facilitated to be transported even to other provinces of Pakistan, mostly to Sindh. So no data available, no one is willing to provide the data to be incorporated in the national inventory as well. So would you please stop getting it done? Thank you.
Thank you. Now we are down to our last 10 minutes, and because we have to find some time for the responses also, let me be a little bit unfair and put people on the spot. Dr. Saab, there was a question about rangelands. If you like to address that. Arid zones are particularly important for Pakistan. Please, a very short answer.
Okay, the rangelands are almost as big as our cultivated agricultural area. They are neglected lands. We do not have any plans to rejuvenate them. Most of them are being exploited beyond their capacity. The rangelands are also victim of deforestation because it's a combination of grasses and trees. So the rangelands are being overgrazed. Then there is an issue of community involvement, which is missing. There is a migration because of droughts. There is also a case of putting those rangelands back to irrigated agriculture. So there is definitely a big opportunity for climate adaptation by visiting and restoring the rangelands the way they should be. Should be maintained.
Sajid, you want to take one of the questions?
Yes, I will answer two major questions regarding the social media and the tree plantation. So I will get the opportunity that we are not planting trees. Keep it in your mind. We are planting the plants. There is a huge difference between tree and the plant. This is the myth that we cut one tree and we said we planted 10 trees. No, these all are just plants and we don't know how many will become the trees. Maybe nothing. That is the one thing. And the other thing is regarding the social media. In our college, and if it will be a law or mandatory for every education institution or every official capacity that everybody will plant one plant every year, and he or she will be responsible up till 5 years. تو میں نے تو اپنے کالج میں کیا جی 4 سال کی ڈگری ہے تو جو اسٹوڈنٹ فرسٹ ایئر میں میرے پاس آئے گا 4 سال وہ پلانٹ لگائے اور آفٹر 4 years he or she will be responsible, then he will get the degree.
Good example. I do wish to ask Nosheen and Simi online if they want to give a quick answer to any of the questions.
Yes, Ali, I very quickly will just answer in terms of the question regarding trees. And so in the context of heat and global warming and urban heat islands and cities in particular, the right to shade has become an increasingly important issue. Should the right to shade be made something that is part of a law, it's part of a decree? When we think about cities across Pakistan, we must bear in mind informal workers, construction workers, street vendors, these kinds of informal economies make up such an important and critical part of livelihood systems in our urban formations. Where do people from these particular livelihood systems find shade in the city today, especially in cities like Karachi, Lahore, Peshawar, جہاں پر پبلک اسپیس کو اب پرائیویٹائز کیا جا رہا ہے, جہاں پر اسٹریٹ وینڈرز کو نکالا جا رہا ہے. I mean, that is also through the use of legal violence. تو the right to shade, the right to cooling, یہ trees, یہ ساری کہانی بالکل ایک ساتھ ملی جلی ہے اور اس میں لاء کا بھی بہت امپورٹنٹ رول ہے.
Absolutely. A tree-lined street has 6 degrees less temperature. Imagine Jacobabad. Dr. Saab, last chance to you.
جی میں رسپونڈ کروں گا کلائمیٹ ریزیلینس کو. In GB especially, in Gilgit-Baltistan, if you look at the socio-economic dynamics of that region, women are most vulnerable. Men out-migrate for earning butter and bread for their family, and women are left behind to do agriculture, to take care of their children, animals, and also to face the consequences of climate-induced disasters. There is a dire need of capacity building of communities and the institutions over there. So there are some village organizations which are very well organized, and there are some interventions, but the speed of climate change is faster than our pace. Therefore, we are lagging behind.
Thank you. I truly want to apologize from my panelists that sometimes I really had to interrupt because of time constraints. And while I was within my time frame, I was getting taweez from every side. But let me try to sum up some of the thoughts. I know it was very quick and very fast.
May I finish? May I?
Simi, please go
ahead. May I give you my
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So in order to answer some of the questions that were raised, I think what's really important to understand is that our Barani areas, our watershed areas, deserts, rangelands, and coastal areas that are outside the Indus Basin have been absent, largely absent from discussions on water security and on climate change. And these are extremely vulnerable. So we have to ensure that these voices get to the table where they can be heard. And then when we are talking about access and right to water for agriculture and other activities, which are now heavily influenced by climate change, the need is therefore great and even greater for a comprehensive set of water laws that define water rights, uses, value, conservation, and principles of pricing, subsidies, licenses, and polluter penalties. So this is my request to people who make laws, that this is the right time to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank our panelists. You saw the range of issues. It highlighted 2 things. Pakistan is not only one of the most vulnerable countries, but also Pakistan has some of the most diverse threats coming from different ecosystems. And they're all connected with each other. They say oftentimes river begins to die from the end, from the tail, not from the top. In Pakistan's case, we are dying from both sides. By mid-century, we'll probably lose 2/3 of our glaciers, and that's roughly 80% of Pakistan's surface water. This means a lot of emergency, not just urgency, for water efficiency in our practices. We waste a lot of water, but we don't have drinking water for most people. I want to mention two or three more points. We think of heat waves in Karachi. Heat waves in upper Indus Basin are resulting in speeding up our glaciers. They are retreating fast because of because of heat waves, and that also results additional surface water these years, but permanent reduction later, not to mention disasters. I want to mention one or two more points in 1 or 2 minutes that if I could. No issue is very far for us. Each of these issues will affect us directly or indirectly, sooner or later. All we need is integrated approaches. These ecosystems are linked with each other, be it trees, agriculture, urban settlements, or our mountain areas habitat. What is important for us to see that some of these ecosystems are fast approaching tipping points, resulting in large-scale displacement. The very fact that the rate of urbanization is twice as high as population shows that the carrying capacity of our ecosystems is fast depleting. People don't have livelihood options there. Their rights are violated. They go to urban areas in search of better lives, little knowing that they are further marginalized there in low-lying areas, flood-prone areas, disaster-prone areas, where schools, education, parks, public transportation, none of that is easily available. So they move from one poverty net to more stubborn poverty net. No wonder the incidence of poverty in Pakistan and Pakistan's urban areas will be the highest. Now, allow me to connect, not only that our ecosystems are connected and responses need to be connected, since these are very diverse issues from each other, their fundamentals are all connected with each other. And that is our relationship with nature. It has to be more respectful, perhaps, than it has been so far. So far, it has been very extractive. So far, we have not been very sensitive, oftentimes. But what is important is these will hinge our fundamental rights. And that is why it is a very welcome day for us today to see that the Supreme Court has taken the initiative to ensure that this is seen by all segments of society, including senior and junior judiciary, to see that these are issues of drinking water, sanitation, urban planning, air pollution, groundwater depletion, or contamination. All these are linked with the quality of our life and lifestyles for us and for our children. Therefore, we need to pay an urgent attention to some of these issues. Please join me in thanking my panelists. Thank you, ma'am. It's all yours, sir.
Thank you, sir, and thank you everybody who spoke so knowledgeably about important subjects. We have two important panels coming up, but I think right now it's best if we take a 5-minute break where you can stand up, stretch your legs, talk to people around you. If possible, try not to leave the room so you can be back on your seats in 5 minutes. Thank you very much for your patience and attention.